Good morning. Episode 3 of your pal Jim. They're just getting back together again. But finally, it was late June, and here he was, sitting on a log across from me and looking as near like $1 million as a lumberjack can look. He was dressed in all wool and a rich black watch plaid shirt, gray, short-legged stag pants, and a beautiful new pair of logging boots with an inch or so of white sock showing up top. The lumberjack and the cowboy followed many of the same basic economic and ecological patterns. They achieved a balance as if they were broke at the end of the year. If they were lucky, and if they hadn't been sick or anything like that, they'd have enough money to get drunk 3 or 4 times and then buy their clothes. Their clothes were very expensive. They claimed that they were robbed up and down the line, and they probably were. But clothes that would stand their work and the weather had to be something special. Central to both the lumberjack and the cowboy's outfit were the boots, which took several months of savings. The pair that Jim had on were white loggers made, and as I remember, by a company in Spokane that kept your name and measurements. It was a great shoe, and there were others that were also great, too. They had to be. The Bass, the Bergman, the Chippewa were all made from different parts of the country, but in the Northwest, most of the jacks I remember wore the Spokane shoe. As the cowboy's boot was made for all ways of riding horses and working steers, the logger's boot was made for working around logs. Jim's pair had a 6-inch top, but there were other models with much higher tops. Jim happened to belong to the school that wanted their ankles supported but no tie on their legs. The toe was capless and made of soft, somewhat waterproof, with a neat foot's oil. The shoe was shaped to walk or ride logs. It had a high instep to fit the log, and with a high instep went a high heel. Not nearly as high as a cowboy's, but much sturdier, because these were walking shoes. In fact, very fine walking shoes. The somewhat high heel threw you slightly forward on your normal stance and made you feel like you were being helped ahead. Actually, this feeling was part of their trademark. Jim was sitting with his right leg rocking on his left knee, and he gestured a good deal with his foot, raking the log I was sitting on for emphasis and leaving behind a gash on its side. The soles of these loggers' boots looked like World War I with trenches and barbed wire, highly planned, everything planned, in this case for riding logs and walking. Central to the grand design were the caulks, or corks as the jacks called them. They were long and sharp enough to hold a heavily barked log, or tougher still, to one that was dead and had no bark on it. But of course, caulks would have ripped out at the edges of a shoe and made you stumble and trip at the toes. So the design started with a row of blunt, sturdy hobnails around the edges, maybe 4 or 5 rows of them at the toes. Then inside became the battlefield of caulks, the real barbed wire, with 2 rows of caulks coming down each side of the sole, 1 row on each side continuing into the step to hold you when you jumped crosswise on a log. Actually, it was a beautiful, if somewhat primitive design, and it had many uses. For instance, when a couple of jacks got into a fight and one went down, the other one was almost sure to kick and rake him with his boots. This treatment was known as giving him the leather. And when the jack got this treatment, he was out of business for a long time and was never pretty again. Every time Jim kicked and raked the log beside me for emphasis, I wiped small pieces of bark off my face. In this brief interlude in our relations, it seemed to me that his face had grown a great deal since I first knew him last year. But from last year, I remember a big frame, big head, small face, tight like a fist. Even I wondered at times if it wasn't his best punch, his small face. But sitting here relaxed and telling me about his pimping and spraying bark on his face, he looked all big, his nose too, and his eyes. He looked handsome, and clearly he liked pimping for at least 4 or 5 months of the year, and he especially liked being a bouncer in his own establishment. But even that, he said, got boring. It was good to be out in the woods, he said, and it was good to see me. He also said that, and it was good to be back at work. He said that several times. All right, let's pick up for episode 4 later. Have a great one. Have fun. Love you.